But TFC have their new man in charge, a familiar face, familiar name. Robin Fraser returns. He was Greg Vanney's right-hand man back in the glory years of Toronto FC. He went off to Colorado for 2 and a bit years, had a couple of good seasons there before being fired, I think, in the 3rd season. But he knows the club, knows the DNA, whatever that means. We hear that all the time in football. He knows the club's DNA, even though it's changed a lot since he was there. It's a far less successful DNA right now. But in comes Robin Fraser, Craig. This team needs more than a new coach to turn things around, clearly. It's a weird thing, the MLS, right? In that you got camps opening this week. Most teams are still doing all the work to improve and change their squads. TFC looks very familiar right now, very similar to how they were. But they have got a new man, at least, on the sidelines. Can he be the difference maker, or is it still a big old rebuild here?
It's still a rebuild, but I think, it's some stability. Hopefully that'll come into play with him and his history at the club and knowledge of the club and knowing it so well. Hopefully that'll put him in good stead. But he's got a big job to do. But between him and the backroom staff, they should be able to put a team together that should compete.
It's easy to do that, right? Just ask Bob Bradley and John Herdman, Chris Armas. Who's the other guy in there? I forget his name now. Complete brain freeze. There's another coach in that little group since Greg Vanney left.
Oh,
Perez. It hasn't been that. Yeah, Perez. Thank you.
Perez.
It hasn't been that easy though, has it, Dubs? It's been an uphill battle. Stability is something, of course it is. But the club that Robin Fraser left is in the distant past.
Yeah, I think I look at it like you looking on Twitter and on socials when this was announced. It was leaked, and then the club's hand was kind of forced to come out with their official announcement, just to stick it to us because we predicted that they'd be the first. But I think there was a little bit of a letdown. I think people were underwhelmed with the appointment. But I think you have to look and see it like if you have ambition as a club. They do. They have success in the past. They won the treble in 2017. I think if you go after a big name, or you get a guy like John Herdman, or like even Bradley in the past, it's about the manager. It's about the coach. I think you bring in a guy like Robin Fraser. He understands what it is. I think they're without an identity now. We've talked about that for the last few months. So he's going to instill something that is about the clubs, like their badge, about what their identity, what they want it to be, what the fans want it to be. And it's about the players. It's about the roster and what they're going to create versus a narrative created by the person who's in charge. So I think to me, it's the sensible, pragmatic, long-term success appointment versus a splash of a big name, of a personality, of a person. And it becomes kind of unilateral. It becomes singular in just that person and what they're about versus it should be about the club and it should be about the players.
Yeah, of course it should be. There's a lot of cap room to bring in new players. Haven't seen much movement just yet. But Jimmy, it's more about that, isn't it? It's more about who the players they bring in now than I think the coach. But you obviously have been around the club long enough. You know of Robin Fraser as Greg Vanney's right-hand man. It's underwhelming, according to many, in that he's not the big name, which I guess Bob Bradley was. I guess John Herdman was. Neither of whom worked out. Are you comfortable with this choice?
Look, I think it's a difficult decision for the club because, at the time you're looking and seeing what managers are really out there. There was Jim Curtin. I think he ended up saying he didn't want to come. He wanted to stay in Philly. Dela went to Atlanta United. And then you're looking around to see who else is really out there and what managers are stepping forward, available in world football. And obviously with Robin Fraser, you're going through your list and thinking, okay, well, here's a guy that's had success and has been a part of the club that did have success and winning an MLS championship. He knows the city. He knows the club. Is he the right guy? Is he the guy that comes in, for a year or two until they maybe get their right guy? Is he the guy that's going to be in here and hopefully they get success right away and he's going to be here for the long haul? It's always a bit of a gamble when you hire a manager, because you don't know how long they're going to last or what they're going to do. There's going to be expectations that he's got to hit. But at the end of the day, it's down to the manager to get the best out of the players that are in that dressing room right now. And I'm sure Robin Fraser would be delighted to be back. I'm sure he's got a plan of what he wants to do. Obviously, the club have been putting their own identity and philosophy together of what they expect. So it's going to be a lot of work behind the scenes. But I think the one good thing that I like with Robin Fraser is that he does know the club and he does know the city. So it won't take him long to settle.
But when you say he knows the club, like, can we break that down? Because we hear it all the time, right?
Yeah, because he was here for 5 years or whatever it was.
Yeah. No, I get that. But since he left, it's a brand new staff, right?
Yeah.
How many people are remaining? I mean, is the essence of the club still the same as it is 5 years ago?
Well, when I say the club, I mean it's the people that work in the club, and behind the scenes,
right.
The training ground, the kitchen staff, the people the janitors, the security guards, and people that have been around the club for a long time. And yeah, he'll recognize them. They'll recognize him, and you just know what the club's all about, and you know what the expectations of the club are all about. Because when he was here with Vanny, it was, we're going to put a team together, we're going to bring in the right players, and we're going to win a championship. So he knows what expectations are, and he knows the club. So
the common denominator here is the janitors and the security staff. They're still here. Have they got a free pass in this failure in the last number of years? Have the janitors got the free pass? Are they the problem? Is this why the club's falling apart?
No, they're the heart and soul. Those people that keep the club ticking, and the supporters. He's so dumb.
I wonder if that was part of it too, whether the backroom staff that John Herdman has, and as far as I know, they're still there. So maybe that was part of it, that he would keep them around. I'm not sure how easy it would be to change them over.
Yeah, would he bring his whole? Yeah, because usually the whole staff comes aboard, right? He'd bring in a new manager, and I'm sure he'll bring some people in, but there's still some incumbents there for sure. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
No, please, Dubs.
I was just going to say, like, I was reading up on him. I didn't know a tremendous amount about him, but he's coached as an assistant, I think, more often than he's been a head coach. So he had stints at Real Salt Lake, at Chivas, with Red Bulls as an assistant, and also with TFC, obviously. What was his philosophy when he was head coach at the Colorado Rapids? And do we know if his style of play, his system, what he wants to put into place at TFC, will that lend itself well to success with the pieces that are already present at TFC?
That's a great question, and we're going to track down a Rapids journo to give us some insight about when he was at the club. They did very well, right? I think they made playoffs a couple of years in a row. The third year it kind of went pear-shaped, but under Greg Vanny, I know they played three at the back frequently. That's kind of the 3-5-2, right? It was kind of the general strategy. Now he's inheriting a club that's been playing three at the back. Although, Craig, I mean, people have criticized that with John Herdman, saying perhaps they shouldn't have done. Perhaps, Feder Bernadeschi is better off playing, in a more traditional wing role than playing at a wing back. Do you think he'll continue that experiment? That's a big one, right? Bernadeschi, for all the criticism, has actually been pretty good. And it isn't the problem at that club. But he was being played out of position and did it without any complaint, worked hard. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is something that, under the strategy of Robin Fraser, he'll continue looking at?
I think so. I mean, he's going to be able to tinker in preseason. He's going to have a full preseason to work with this squad, plenty of games, plenty of opportunities to see what he's got and where the attitude and the players sit, and then what kind of system works best for the players that he has available for him. He has to be flexible. He can't be stuck on certain things. I mean, remember Aaron Vinter stuck on a 4-3-3?
Ajax, the model, right? The total football, wasn't it? Total football.
And he didn't budge. And yet the personnel did not suit it. And he found himself out the back door pretty quickly.
But Jimmy,
the back door.
Robin, though, I mean, Fraser, he's, if I remember, he was highly respected at TFC when he was here. People really liked him. And it was a matter of time before he got another chance as a head coach. That was always, on the back burner. Will someone snipe Robin Fraser? And they did in the end, Colorado. So, I mean, I wouldn't consider it a get. I mean, they looked at Jim Curtin, didn't they, TFC? And it looks like he wants to take some time off. Gio Savarese was being mentioned as well, who did a great work at Portland. Who knows where he ends up, but whether they looked at him closely, I don't know. And then here's the thing, right? And we discussed this the last few months. If you're Bobby Simoniatis or Tommy Wilton Jr., like, if now's not the time to make that move to MLS, I don't know when is. What more can these guys do? Now, Vancouver's still got to announce their coach, right? They could surprise us and go off the board a little bit and go with a Canadian. But it didn't happen at Toronto FC once again. Where are you at with that, Jimmy, at this point? Is this just typical? Do you think they look closely at both those coaches? Are you disappointed as alumni, as, you know, someone in the mix here, that, again, a Canadian wasn't looked at for the TFC head coaching job?
It's a difficult one. I mean, you're right, and you're saying, okay, when do they get the opportunity? If they're not getting into MLS, is their next step maybe USL? You know, the same thing as what Danny Dichio's doing in Detroit, to then make that jump up into MLS. And you don't know how the meetings went when they sat down and put in their presentations and how they got on. You just don't know what happened behind the scenes or how those interviews actually went. But you know, it's you definitely want to see Bobby and you want to see Tommy get an opportunity at some time in their career. But it's just that step. Are people in MLS willing to take a gamble on a coach in a CPL, or would they rather take a coach from the USL and then take that gamble? So it's a difficult situation, and I don't have the answer for it, but I know they must be definitely frustrated, because I think them themselves would be thinking that they deserve an opportunity at some point. For sure they do. And if they're getting interviews, but they're just not close enough either for some reason.
Jimmy, what does a presentation look like? Just in my brain, I don't know the context that you're using that. What does it look like to interview for either a top level or even a assistant? What does that look like on a professional level?
I mean, you would end up putting a presentation together. They'll reach out and say, you know, can you put something together, talk about yourself, talk about you as a manager, your development, how you see a pathway for players coming maybe out of the academy into the first team. Tell us how you want to organize your first team, your style of play. And you tend to put a big presentation together to sell yourself. And then what you'll do is you'll present and they'll ask you questions and you go back and forth. You know, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 presentations and conversations before you end up getting that job.
Maybe a song or an interpretive dance.
Sometimes they do dances. Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can see Bobby doing some kind of cool little Aussie dance.
It'd be a great one. Break plates.
Yeah. Spinning shit.
Yeah. Probably be on the barbecue.
Tommy's more of a moonwalking worm kind of guy, I think, though, right? I
would see Tommy doing a magic show.
He is a magician. He looks like a magician, doesn't he?
It'd be very hit or miss.
Yeah.
He'd either kill or it'd be like fart in church. One of the two.
I don't know. I'll tell you what, though, Dubs. I mean, if you're one of those two guys, say Tommy and Bobby, they say they did interview for the job. I would be interviewing TFC as much as they were interviewing me, though, in that situation. Like, what is your plan here? Because both those guys have built clubs from the ground up.
Yeah.
Right? From the ground up. They're not just your typical head coach comes in to put together a formation and train guys. And they build clubs. And you're entering a club that already is building under Jason Hernandez's vision, right?
Yeah.
It's a very, I think, different scenario. And perhaps they said, no, we don't know this. Maybe they say, well, I want a bigger role here than just coaching the football team. Is that possible, do you think?
I think it is possible. But I think you'd also have to think realistically that, as you know, to use Jimmy's words, like TFC would be taking a quote unquote gamble on a CPL coach or a gamble on a USL coach. I don't know if it's really that, and I'm kind of splitting hairs here. But I do think that from Tommy's perspective and Bobby's perspective, that they just would like a shot at this quote unquote higher level. it is a step up, right? And it is a massive club when you're talking about TFC. So I think it, and again, I have no insight into what they're thinking or what their next steps, like what they would like them to be for their career and what their ambitions are. But I think you'd be willing to leave that aside and just try your hand as an MLS coach, even if you don't have kind of a hand in the pathway and shaping the academy and what the vision is and instilling your philosophy kind of top to bottom, and then also in your player recruitment, right? I think they'd be willing to kind of waive that just for the opportunity. But I do agree with you that I think any coach that was probably in that room, whether it was PowerPoint or interpretive dance, that they would have had an equal amount of questions for the organization to say, like, yes, this is an opportunity for me, but I want to make sure that I'm jumping in with 2 feet here with something that has stability. So if Robin Fraser is the coach who's going to bring stability to the organization, I think you need to be able to look across the table and hope that that's being provided to you in equal measures, even though it's a tenuous job. We know that.
Craig, it is a valid point, right? That, as far as building a team up, they're not going to, okay, it's one thing taking a gamble on a CPL coach to say to a CPL executive, yeah, you're going to coach and build our vision as well. There's a lot to ask. But if you are, it's okay, say you're Robin Fraser, what are you walking into at this point? Because you don't know what your squad looks like. We assume there's going to still be a lot of changes. Haven't been many changes so far. Right, it's tough to make moves, at this point. What are you walking into? Are you just looking? Do you really see this as being a quick fix? Because in MLS you can do that with smart moves in the off season. Look at Montreal right now, making some pretty smart moves, under the radar moves. But I think they're looking better now than they were a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
You can improve a team pretty quickly in MLS with the right people in charge.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing when you're coming into a job, when the team over the last 4 years, 3 of those 4 years finished in the bottom 3, at least he's not coming in and John Herdman made the playoffs, had a big run and then resigned, and then he's got to come and do that. Everything's a risk. Doesn't matter who it is, when it is. As a manager, your lifespan, and you're being hired to be fired and to try to get it right as quickly as you possibly can. And without relegation, we talked about this, there's no worry about that. But I think from a standpoint, we're talking about presentations, you got to think about presenting yourself to people that aren't necessarily football people. And that's the CSA, that's Vancouver Whitecaps, that's Toronto FC and MLSE. You got to go in there and try to sell yourself to people that aren't necessarily football people. So a lot of the stuff that you might be talking about to football people, about philosophies and things like that, that's just going to be water off a duck's back to some of these people. So
what insight, Craig Forrest. That's a great one.
Yeah, you got to know who you're presenting to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and that could change in the next months, years as well, because we've discussed this before, and I spoke to someone on Friday, quite high up in Canadian soccer, who asked a question, how much patience does MLSE have for this club? They're bleeding money right now. In comes Keith Pelly to kind of clean things up in that organization. Is there an opportunity to sell this club at some point? We're with Larry Tannenbaum, who loves his football, loves TFC, is getting out of MLSE. Would he be a potential candidate to buy that club? Would they sell to Larry and his group? Jimmy, is that, the more I think about this, I think it's a very reasonable question to ask. How much patience does MLSE have for this? And if so, if they're going to flip it, would a Larry, for example, be interested in buying it?
Yeah, I'd imagine that if Larry did leave, that if the club came up for sale, then absolutely, I think Larry would take it. He also owns Saint Etienne as well in France. So, yeah, I wouldn't say no to that. But on the other side, I don't see and can't see MLSE getting rid of TFC.
No, I don't either.
Why?
Because they're a money-making machine eventually, with the rights fees going up, the amount of the support that they have here, the corporations that are backing it, sponsorship. I don't see them going absolutely anywhere. I think they're in a strong position, and with rights fees going as they are, they're always going to be in a solid footing.
They again, was it 10 million, wasn't it, Craig, initially when got the Yeah, 10 million, and the club's worth what now? You know, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. They can make a pretty decent profit on paper. Looks great. I just don't know. I look at MLSE. I look at their devotion to the Leafs and the Raptors, number 1 and number 1A, right? And that seems to be their real focus. I don't know. I've heard nothing. I'm not suggesting that this team's going to be solid anytime soon, but I think there is, with a team that's bleeding money and a new guy in charge who's there to kind of clean things up and find some efficiencies, that would be an easy one to get rid of.
Sharms, you're the, I want to hear what you think. Take your host hat off and put on your supporter hat. There you go. There's your supporter hat, MLSE. You have been accused of being the biggest TFC fan in a negative way. What are you thinking?
Listen, I think Robin Fraser, like I said, was respected. It's not the wrong choice necessarily. It's not the most ambitious choice. Perhaps it's an easier choice to make. It's a safe choice, like Dubs mentioned. I'm disappointed that it's not a Canadian getting the opportunity. We've been on this Bobby and Tommy bandwagon for a long time. I don't know what more they can accomplish. But maybe they were interviewed, right? Like Jimmy said, we don't know what happened there. But yeah, listen, Robin Fraser, like I said, big names haven't worked in the past.
Right.
And he's respected. And like I said, I remember, I don't know, I think I may have met Robin maybe twice in my life during the Vanny era. He seemed like a really good guy, which doesn't mean anything in sports. It doesn't mean he'd be successful. But and again, as speaking from a non-fan, because I'm not really a fan. I want to be a fan. One day when I retire from this stupid business, I'll be a fan. But they're not my team, as people may insinuate sometimes. But yeah, why not? Let's see. Hopefully it works out. But it's not about Robin Fraser at this point. It's about what they can do with that squad, which is clearly lacking in numerous areas. And what can they do with Lorenzo Insigne? Is that going to drag on again through another year of frustration for the fan base?